Hey Revolutionaries, I can't wait to bring you this week's episode with Jim Metzendorf, who's a master podcast editor and sound engineer. And in this episode, we talk about how he got into freelancing and how he's been able to turn his freelancing into a full-time podcast editing business. And how he's been able to score the key podcast editing job for the All Turtles podcast, a new podcast about artificial intelligence. And you've got to hear Jim's description about what All Turtles means. So make sure you listen to this one. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Launch House and Todd Goldstein. Over the weekend, they had their Bootstrap Bash, which is their annual fundraiser for the Launch House, and it's a big party where everybody has fun, comes together, and all the entrepreneurial people in Northeast Ohio and the Great Lakes region come together and celebrate entrepreneurship and network and get to know each other. I really enjoyed it, and one of the cool things is that as you come into the bash, as you walk in, you have to run through this gauntlet of booths and tables that are set up of all these new business and entrepreneurs that are associated with the Launch House, working out of the Launch House, or leveraging the expertise and the networking that you can find through the Launch House. I just love this aspect of the bash because I get to learn about all the people I work next to in the Launch House on a day-to-day basis. So I'm a Launch House member, and I work out of there 2 or 3 days a week when I'm in town, if I'm not on the road. But it's so great basically seeing the benefits of the Launch House in action, where you can actually see what people are really doing with their businesses and how they're promoting them and what the benefits are and how successful they are. It's really just motivating, It's great. So if you're interested in the Launch House and want to know more information, you can always go to launchhouse.com, launchhouse.com, and check it out. Stop on by sometime, and we can hang out and talk about, business ideas or something. Anyways, speaking of coming there and hanging out, Jim Metzendorf, I'm talking to you. You got to come by sometime, and we got to hang out and talk more about business models, investing, podcasting, and such. But in the meantime, I want everyone else to get introduced to Jim. So here's this week's episode.
Welcome to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast, the show that explores reinvention in the digital age as it relates to career, creativity, and technology. Stay tuned for interviews with professionals, entrepreneurs, and creatives that have reimagined success and are making a pivot. If you'd like to listen to the entire back catalog, visit jimreinventionrevolution.com for instant access. And now, here's your host, Jim.
Hey everybody, this is Jim, and welcome to episode 20 of Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. And I'm sitting here with Jim Metzendorf, and we're talking freelancing and podcast editing today. So Jim, welcome to the revolution.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be on the Jim Reinvention Revolution.
How many Jims do we have in the room,
right,
I guess?
Exactly.
Well, Jim, there's, I guess, Jim, and Jim. That's 3, I guess, right?
Yep.
Hey, thanks for being here, and thanks for inviting me out to your house. So we're in Warren, Ohio today.
That's right.
We're in Warren proper, right?
Ohio's armpit.
Ohio's armpit. Okay. This is bringing back memories because I used to work out here in Warren. You know that. And, I worked with your father. I should mention that I knew your dad.
Yeah.
Who was a great guy. Sorry, I didn't think about that to mention that before. But now that we're talking here, I got to mention how great he was and what a cool guy he was. And he was into technology and media arts and photography and all kinds of stuff. And maybe that's where you got your influence from. I don't know, but you can tell me.
Oh, yeah. That's where I got almost everything.
Okay.
Was from him.
Yeah.
He was a photographer by trade and an electronics enthusiast and audio engineer, I guess you could say as a hobby. Okay. He was a recording engineer for the Youngstown Symphony for a good 40 years.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
Wow. All right.
But as I said, his main vocation was as photographer. But he was one of these kids who was developing their own film at 12 years old and building their own crystal radios at 12 years old. And,
wow, incredible.
He was an incredibly smart guy with those things. And, those were, huge life inspirations for me, for sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's why we connected, because the reason I knew him was I was working in this advanced engineering area at Packard Electric and General Motors, developing new products, and so we'd have to interface. I had to interface with your dad because he was in charge of all the media, I think, that was going on there. So in order to put presentations together, to take pictures of the new products, you had to go see your dad.
Yeah.
And and when we were talking, I was like amazed at how knowledgeable he was, how technical he was, how cool and hip he was with technology, where a lot of the other folks at the time that were, older, I was just coming out of school, but, the folks that I thought at the time were way older, now that I'm older, but
Yeah.
he really knew what was going on. And I was like, wow, this guy's awesome. And he's like, he was a good mix of technical, creative, and artistic, all in one, which you need to have in this media world.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I was like, wow, this is a really cool guy.
Yep.
Always remembered him. And remember the name Metzendorf, So then when I heard about you like years later, I just, we just...
Yeah, first time we met, we were playing saxophone together.
Yeah, saxophone together, which is another crazy connection between us. Is Jim is a fabulous saxophone player, and I love listening to him play. He's got a great sound. Incredible sound, like Coltrane-ish kind of sound.
Thanks,
really,
man.
really good stuff. So if you're ever in the area Monday nights, go see Jim at where is it? Brothers Lounge.
Brothers Lounge.
Okay, the Sketch Anderson Orchestra. Okay,
yeah.
Put in a little plug for that, but we'll get to the freelancing and
Right.
podcasting part in a second here. But just to give you a little knowledge of how I got connected to Jim was, I think I first heard about you because someone had mentioned your name, that you were teaching at Tri-C, which is Cuyahoga Community College here in Northeast Ohio.
Right.
And what were you teaching there?
I was in the recording arts department, and I was teaching a variety of classes within that discipline. So one of the things was radio production, but I was also teaching MIDI technology, which is the interfacing language that's used for synthesizers and samplers and things like that, if people aren't familiar. But also teaching classes in sound for film and TV and recording studio techniques, things like that.
Right. So I was like, and they said you played saxophone. So I was like, how do I not know this guy? And I didn't know you were teaching there. And anyways, we eventually found, I eventually discovered you, I think, probably on a Monday night watching the band or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was fun. Anyways, it plays into the story of freelancing because you were freelancing essentially teaching at this community college. That's kind of when I first got introduced to you. That's what you were doing, right? Mainly?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, because I was an adjunct instructor there.
Okay,
which is the collegiate word for freelance.
Right.
That's exactly right. Basically,
that's right. It is.
And so I was doing that, and I was also doing audio editing, including podcast editing.
Okay.
Not to jump too far ahead, but I started doing podcast editing in 2010.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes.
I thought it was just like in the last year or two.
No,
So
I've been at
quite
it
a
for
while.
a long time.
How did you originally get into podcast editing?
Well, the initial thing for me was I was always into audio production.
Okay.
And my job in college was as a board operator and recording engineer for WYSU, which is the NPR affiliate at Youngstown State University.
Right, okay.
And so my first gig there was actually hosting an all-night jazz show, and I did a classical show on Sunday mornings at one point, and I had a movie soundtrack program, but I would also record sessions for some of the talk shows that they produced there.
Oh, that the station produced.
Yes.
Okay.
So they had a couple of local interest shows that I was the engineer for.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
And between that experience and influence from my dad, that got me hooked on audio production.
Okay.
And of course, an interest in music as well.
Right.
And so I can remember, listening to podcasts in kind of the early days of when it started to come about. What was that, around 2006, 2007?
Right.
There were some things earlier than that,
Right.
but
that's about the right time, though. So you were very early on in just discovering podcasts and listening to them.
As a listener,
Well,
cool.
I
was right there at the start, and so in 2010 is when I had a need through necessity.
Okay.
In other words, the theme of freelancing, getting laid off from a day job.
Right.
I used to work for Avid Technology.
Okay.
Which is the company that makes Pro Tools and Media Composer video editing software. So I worked for them for a long time, and that was awesome. I loved it.
What were you doing for them? What was your job title?
I was a product specialist.
Okay.
And I worked in the training and education department.
Oh, cool.
So my job was to go all over the U.S. and Canada and help out our partner schools and prospective partner schools. So Avid developed their own curriculum based around the use of their products, and they would sell that curriculum and certification programs that went along with it to these partner schools. So I was one of the people who was responsible for the care and feeding of existing partners, but also bringing on new partners.
I see. Okay.
So that was a lot of fun. That gave me a chance to see a lot of airports.
Yeah, right.
And drive a lot of very average rental cars.
Exactly.
But no, I really loved that job a whole lot, and it was difficult for me when that ended, when I got laid off.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a great job, too, and it's fun, and you're young, you're traveling, and that's got to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. It really was, and that really, I think, speaks to the theme of, I think, what you're hoping to convey in this episode about, freelance and the freelance life.
Right.
Is, sometimes you get thrown into it without preparation,
right?
Without expecting it,
right?
So, anyways, to kind of condense that, got laid off from that job, and I, was a person who had, some experience doing audio production, and I was super into this podcast thing as a listener.
Right.
I loved the medium and what it was, what it represents. So I had found out that one of the podcast networks that I listened to was looking for a part-time editor.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I reached out to them and started working with them. It was 5x5.tv, run by Dan Benjamin.
I see.
And
where were they located? Were they local or national? Where are they?
Dan is based in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And it's funny because I met him exactly once in person.
Okay.
I worked on shows for Dan for 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And we only ever met in person once.
Right.
And the only reason we met in person was because I happened to be down in Florida a week before he was moving from the Orlando area to where he is in Austin now.
Texas. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So your paths crossed for one moment in time.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And so that's where I got my start, and I've been fortunate that almost every client since that client has been, in one way or another, a referral from that initial thing turned into, okay, here's another thing, and here's the third thing, and here's how the fourth thing I got because of the second thing I did.
Right.
And it really has all stemmed from referrals from one thing to another.
Wow, interesting.
Or, at the very least, because those shows, working with those people were, something I had experience with.
Right.
And so if I was approaching a prospective client and they'd say, what have you done?
Sure.
And you say, well, I've, worked with so-and-so and, done such and such. not in a name dropping way, but just
Right.
in here's my resume.
Yeah, it's part of your portfolio.
Here's what
now.
I've done. I've been, like I said, just spoiled rotten, really. That it's all worked out that way, because I've never really had to like actively advertise
or market yourself in a larger way somehow.
Which isn't to say that I haven't needed more work
Right.
than I was getting,
Right.
which I certainly have at many points along the way. But self-promotion, I guess you could say, is something that I've never been good at.
Right. I totally understand that, especially being kind of coming from the technical side of things. That's, I'm not the best at self-promotion either, but I'm trying to learn more because I'm running the show now,
Yeah. Well, I had somewhat of a sales background too.
Yeah.
Because the gig at Avid and the job I had prior to that were in some ways, sales oriented, and Avid was great because it never felt like a sales job. I've been around enough sales guy type people to find a lot of that to find the approach very distasteful. Mm-hmm. And so to me, self-marketing, self-promotion, there's a fine line there.
Right.
It's got, to me, if it doesn't seem organic or authentic, then it seems really gross to me.
Right.
And it's just really a turnoff.
Yeah, I agree. But I think the best salespeople don't have those qualities.
That's
I think
true.
it's sort of a naive point when some people get into sales. They're just not understanding what the role is. It's really about understanding the pain points,
right?
Serving up the right stuff to the right person at the right time. And, not trying to modify someone's behavior necessarily. It's just trying to find the right, fill the right need.
Yeah.
And when you come up from it from that point, then it's like, where have you been all my life? That's the real service that you can really present to someone.
Yeah, good sales is actually the exact opposite of Glengarry Glen Ross.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. That's the famous movie with, who was it? Alec Baldwin. Jack Lemmon, I think. Was
Jack Lemmon.
Oh, what a great film.
Always Be Closing.
Yeah,
Coffees for Closers. All of that.
Exactly. So this experience it's very interesting for me to hear, because I hear a couple things. The reason I asked you, first off, when you reached out to this, what was this guy's name again in the organization?
Dan Benjamin.
Yeah. I asked whether he was local or not, because I think this makes a big difference in your mindset or in the opportunities you see, and definitely in the world that we live in now. Okay, so it's a lot of the economy now is going to be digitally based, and so because of that, you're really not limited like we were years ago when we first got out of school. At least for me, for sure. You're always thinking like, well, what city do I need to move to for my next opportunity? And I came to Warren, Ohio to work for General Motors because I thought GM was a great company, but my prospects were limited here with General Motors because of location. I mean, it's just a smaller town. That's just kind of the way it is. There's a few plants here, and that's all that was ever going to be here in terms of sort of opportunity with General Motors. So if I wanted to kind of move up the chain in that kind of company, I would have had to move to Detroit or New York or most likely China, because that's where the real growth markets are, China or South Korea or something like that. But that's not the case these days, and you found that right off the bat where it's like, this guy that was in Florida or then Texas, he's like, has no problem finding you and hiring you because you have the skills, right? Yeah. So that's just incredible right there, just on the surface. And then, of course, when he asks you to do more things, my second question, or kind of focus of what I heard there you're talking about, is it sounded like you got a lot of more opportunities, but were there things that he asked you to do that you were completely comfortable doing, or did they force you to grow, or, like usually, like, if you put your business hat on, when a customer asks you to do something, you just say yes and then go figure it out later how to do it, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to keep the revenue, you want to keep your customer happy, you want to kind of keep the relationship there. Saying no sometimes is hard.
Yeah.
So what was your experience with, because you were just getting into freelancing at this point. How did you know how to wrangle that whole situation?
I think that's a very apt summary of probably the last 7 years of my professional life, which is saying yes and then figuring out how to do it. Mm-hmm. Especially when I spent a period of time more recently working as a video producer for Delphi, the same company that Jim did, some time ago. But yeah, I think everything initially, and then certainly things along the way were like, hey, can you do such and such with this audio? And it's like, okay, I understand conceptually and on a technical level that can be done. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I don't personally know how to do that, but I'm confident that I can figure it out.
Right.
That's the hamster that's turning in my head.
Right.
And then what comes out is, yeah, sure, I'll do it.
Right.
And then it's like, then the panic sets in, and it's like, oh my God,
What did I get
how do
myself
I do
into?
this?
Right. Yeah.
But it all typically will work out. Now, that's something to be careful with, though, because
Right.
certainly you can get into a situation where if you are really in over your head, not just from a skill level or a technical level, but a time crunch, then you can, that can be a real pickle.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of trial by fire as you go. I guess you were experienced enough in just the business world already that you probably had a little bit of a handle on that, insight into not overloading yourself and just trying to stay in a good zone there. So how does that? So this is. I had no idea that you started in 2010. That's quite a while ago in podcasting terms.
Yeah.
That's great experience. So your name is, the legend grows in terms of like you for me. Okay, the more I get to know you, by the way, because we were just upstairs. I have to tell everybody, we were just upstairs in Jim's command and control center, and he was showing me his editing skills and what he's doing right now, and it's like totally blowing me away because I have no idea what the software is he's using. I don't know all the little techniques that he's showing me how to maneuver just within the computer digital world. I mean, I do my own editing with Audacity now, but I want to get into a little bit of this sort of podcasting nerdy stuff, and maybe this is the right time to kind of swerve into it a little bit.
Sure.
Because with all your early experience of editing these podcasts, now you are editing this new podcast that I hear a lot of people talking about. And it's like, to me, it's a big deal. And I think it's a big deal to everybody out there kind of in the larger industry, especially if you're into technology and if you're into artificial intelligence. So tell everyone one of the main podcasts you're editing now.
Yeah, so one of my more recent pickups as a client is the All Turtles podcast. And it's a crazy name. There is a long story behind the name of the company, All Turtles. It has to do with that, the Hindu proverb of the world is on top of an elephant, and it's something like, I'm butchering this, but it's like something like
Okay.
The world is on top of an elephant, and okay, well, what's the elephant standing on top of? Mm-hmm. And the punchline of the proverb is it's turtles all the way down. Anyways, that's the name of the company. It's All Turtles.
All Turtles,
and All Turtles is co-founded by Phil Libin, who is one of the founders of Evernote, which a lot of people are familiar with. And All Turtles is essentially a portfolio of different artificial intelligence and machine learning companies. Mm-hmm. And so they have different groups that are, different teams that are working on different things, whether they're chat bots of some kind or what have you. And so what's really interesting about their show is there are 3 hosts, and they all record typically will record in a studio in their headquarters in San Francisco. And then oftentimes on the show, they'll also incorporate a 4th person to serve as a guest for an interview. And, sometimes those guests are in studio, but other times they're remote. The show is really interesting because it tackles a lot of interesting things about technology that go way beyond the typical gadget type lust that we have. Everybody likes to talk about the new phone or whatever.
Right.
And they do too, but it's in service of, well, what can you really do on this thing? What can we build on top of this platform? And so anyways, they have this show that we're doing. I just delivered the 11th episode this afternoon, in fact. And it's nice because it's a very relaxed, casual show if you listen to it. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of little things that they do to create structure and to create production value in the show.
Right.
And they're really simple things. One of them is they've adopted distinct segments within the program.
Right.
So that's one thing that's great about podcasts is they can be any topic of any duration. It's not like broadcast radio.
Right.
Where, okay, we've got to hit 28 minutes exactly. It's got to be on the dot.
Right.
Or if you're doing, TV, same deal. Mm-hmm. Podcasts can go as long as you want or as little as you want, and they can be as specific, as tight, or as meandering as you wish.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's a beautiful thing. I love that. But what they've done is within the freedom of what podcasting offers, they have enough structure in there just to help keep things moving.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And I've listened to it a couple of times. I really like their style, and the more I get into podcasting and listen to these things, it's giving me ideas of how to structure Jim's podcast. But I haven't gotten there yet. I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot. Yeah. But it's really cool though. And you're what you bring to the party to help them. Maybe you can tell people specifically what you do for them. Exactly kind of how it works. More the mechanics of what they record and how they feed it back to you and those kind of things. Yeah. Because having such a high level of technical skills that you have really probably helps them out. It's probably a nice relationship between the two of you of can you do this? Yeah, I can do that. Kind of just playing off each other a little bit too. So
yeah,
maybe explain the process that you have. That'd be great for people to hear.
Yeah, sure. So, with them and with most of my clients in general, basically the way it works is they will record their shows either with all local guests or a combination of local and guests over Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they'll send me individual files of everyone's recordings from that episode.
Right.
And so my job is to go in and enhance the sound quality of each one of those tracks and edit it together, making sure that there's consistent levels and as consistent as possible sound quality between each one of the people on the show, adding music, sound effects, bumpers as needed, and then delivering a final result. And part of editing is if people ever listen to one of the shows that I've done and they hear an edit, mm-hmm. I've messed up.
Right.
Yep. You should never hear an edit.
Yeah, you should never notice.
That's the only edit you can hear is a bad edit.
That's right. Yeah, something that knocks you out of the experience of the show. That's right. Yeah, that's what you're trying to eliminate.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I guess where my value comes in for clients is that over the years I've figured out how to make things sound natural in situations where, even though they might be, very technologically savvy people, they just don't have an editing background to be able to make the types of edits so that it's going to sound correct, and correct as in seamless.
Right.
And there's also a certain, not to get too esoteric about it, but there's also a certain shape and flow and rhythm to speech, and especially how different people speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to, through the editing process, you have to tune in to how someone speaks, and then try to make changes, make adjustments, make corrections, while still staying true to how that person speaks.
Sure, their natural speech patterns.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sound awkward or abrupt or something, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so you learn right away how some people are different than others.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a really fun challenge.
I see. Yeah, interesting.
Because sometimes you'll get people that are just their pattern is so different, the cadence is so different than other people that it really catches me off guard, and I think, wow, this person is really different, so I have to pay extra attention to that.
To how you handle them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, having said all of that, I can go through, and I can take every and and throat clear out of an hour-long show.
Right.
But to me, that's not interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not interesting as an editor to do that, such laborious things.
Right.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think if you look at the podcast medium, if you have somebody who once in a while will take a long pause, which I have, as you can all hear, I have Captain Kirk speech disorder.
Right.
And I'm very sorry about that.
Dramatic pause.
Yes. So, see, it's so bad that I when I try to do it as a bit, it's like I can't even do it. So that's part of what I think is okay for the most part in a podcast,
because it's capturing that person's persona or whatever.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
And
personality.
If a person ums and uhs once in a while, yeah, I'll take some out along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say a person ums or uhs 50 times in a show.
Right.
I might take out half of them.
Mm-hmm.
But unless I'm, specifically asked to do so, which I'm happy to do.
Sure.
If that's what somebody wants.
Please your client.
Of course.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
To me, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
People say, we're all real people. And that's and real people who aren't on, Channel 8 News in Cleveland or whatever, say and once in a while.
Well, I think that's the beauty of, like you said before, of podcasts, that it's really a different audio experience. And for right now, and hopefully for a long time, it's a more artistic experience. This is what I've noticed in the space. Is what's drawn me to it. Where it's like, for many years, commercial radio and even NPR, we were kind of served up audio in this certain way that was built around and integrated really tightly into this business model for advertising.
Right.
And it sort of evolved in this certain way, and you got these certain personalities and voices, and and it's been around, I don't know how long the radio industry, kind of as the industry's been around, but maybe 60, 70, 80 years, like really sort of in a mature way. And it works. It worked for them. It's still working today. But now there's this new experience you can have, and it's really just wide open. And I think people are rejuvenated by hearing just real communication, real long form communication in these different ways. It's right. It's not the local news. It's not just a sort of industrious way to exchange information. Where just tell me what happened on the news today. Like the podcasts are a different thing, which is cool. That's fun. And that's where your sort of judgment calls of editing comes in of, I'm not going to take all those out, because you're sort of like, you want to offer up this experience of what's really going on in the room that day.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so that's fun.
Yeah.
Interesting. So how many podcasts can you handle in terms of editing? Are you editing multiple podcasts at once, or do you do it in time slots, or how do you manage like some of the work you're getting now, because you're really, your name's getting around in the industry now, and so I'm sure more people are going to be reaching out to you and thinking like, yeah, we got to get Metzendorf on this project because at the end of this podcast, it's the All Turtles podcast. They give you a shout out or credit at the end, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's nice of them to do that. And most shows typically don't, do credits at the end of shows.
Right.
Although I have other clients who will, mention me once in a while, and it's never required, but always appreciated.
Right.
And as far as how I juggle things, I have a relatively set schedule of what days, what shows are recorded, and when they need to be delivered. Mm-hmm. So I'd have to sit down and recount it, to be honest with you. But I think I'm working on about a dozen different shows a week now.
Oh, really? That's quite a few. Okay.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
My schedule is pretty full. But I have a pretty good idea of what days I need to get what done.
I see. Okay.
So that works out pretty well. There are times, though, when, depending on production and delivery schedules, I might do part of one show and then leave it alone for a while and go work on something else to at least get it started or to get it finished, and juggle things that way.
I see.
And some shows are that kind of comes out of necessity because of the amount of time that it takes to edit and produce them.
Right.
Like the All Turtles is a good example of a show that takes a fairly appreciable amount of time, and I typically wouldn't have a single uninterrupted block of time long enough to do that show from start to finish.
I see, yeah.
So I would have to break it up anyways. But again, that show as an example, that's a show where we actually go through multiple revisions.
I see.
Multiple drafts.
Right.
And so they'll do a recording in the studio, send me the files, maybe or maybe not with some very rough notes, so I can do an assembly edit,
right?
Get a draft back to them, and then there's notes feedback that comes back to me that I then do another draft, and sometimes we're going through several revisions, and so because of that, a show of that nature is going to be something that's the work on a given episode is spread out over the course of maybe 3 or 4 days.
Right.
Whereas a lot of the other shows that I work on are more like, okay, I have, I have 2 hours to get this show done, or this one is going to take me 3 hours, and this is what I need to do on, Wednesday afternoon. I have this show, that show. I have to finish this one, and then I have to do this fourth one.
Right.
And so it's kind of like, well, okay, mentally thinking to myself, okay, I have about 6 hours to do this.
Right. Get these things done today.
And usually I'll make myself just really simple daily to-do lists, just so I can keep track of.
I gotcha.
Of everything.
When you're working with these shows, like for for example, the All Turtles podcast, since it's a bigger show, it's more highly produced. You've got 2 or 3 hosts and a call-in person or whatever. Are you working with a producer on their side or an editor on their side, or are you working directly with the host? Do they kind of self-produce and edit themselves?
It's a host/producer.
Okay.
That I work with on that show.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's like one of the hosts takes on the producing role as well.
That's
kind of
correct.
Coordinating everything for them.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I was just curious how, for a show of that nature that's a little more complex, they might have another just dedicated person that's like just really the coordinator. I guess you call him the producer.
Yeah. And there are a lot of shows out there that do have someone like that.
Right.
Who serve in that.
Right. It was working
role.
with the editor, and then they were on work with the host, and they're working with the business commercial side, probably,
Right.
et cetera.
Yeah.
The sponsors and advertisers, and we can't say this word because of this sponsor or something.
Right.
Who knows how crazy it might
Yeah.
get as as the dollars or
Yeah.
the listenership goes up. I guess it gets more
Right.
technical or important that way. Well, cool. Well, let's. I wanted to dig into the technical details a little bit because people out there that are listening trying to figure out. Well, yeah, I'm just running my own podcast, and I don't know which software to use or what's really going on behind the scenes. Since you're here, I can pick your brain on it a little bit.
Sure.
You showed me a bunch already. What's the software that you like to use to edit?
I use a couple of different things. My daily driver is Adobe Audition, which is part of their Creative Cloud suite of subscription software. So I do enough video work and Photoshop and stuff like that where it's worth it for me to pay the subscription every month for that whole package.
What's the subscription cost? Like, what's the cost
for everything?
range?
It's like $50 a month.
Okay, and that gives you access to all their whole suite.
Yes.
Okay, so that's not
Yeah.
horrible.
So if you're doing that for a living, it's not bad.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, a lot of people really are turned off by subscription-based software, and they would prefer to just buy a license for something and own it perpetually, which I can certainly understand. Although I think realistically, though, the ship has really kind of sailed on that in favor of subscription models, because what happens with a lot of software developers is, let's say there's a piece of software that you buy that's $50. Okay, so you buy that piece of software for $50, and the developer gets your $50, and that's great, but then they don't hear from you again for another 3 or 4 years or whatever until you come out with another version of the software that has enough feature improvements or whatever to warrant a paid upgrade or just rebuying. But then people have this tendency of going, well, I just gave you $50 3 years ago. What the hell?
Yeah.
And
it seems a bit silly these days, right?
That business model is not working really well
right.
for developers
right.
anymore.
Well, things are moving so fast now, and you have to continually update things. I mean, I think, years ago that made probably more sense because things didn't move quite as fast. And there weren't as many devices in terms of you just needed to write the piece of software to go on the PC or the Mac. Now there's mobile tablets and phones, and you have to really support all these other devices simultaneously.
It's a constant cycle.
It's a constant cycle
of refinement.
So I think the subscription base makes a little more sense these days, and you'll get higher value for that money. If you can afford it, and if you can't, there's a lot of actually good free options.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I mean, I use Audition as my main driver. I also use Logic Pro, which is Apple software. I have, I keep my Pro Tools license up to date so I can keep my chops up with Pro Tools. But that's more of, I really don't use that for podcast editing.
Yeah.
There's some other stuff that I do with that. The other big software package that I use is from a company called Izotope. And it's RX. Izotope.
Okay.
So like isotope, but Izotope.
Izotope. Okay.
And they have noise reduction and other audio cleanup software called RX.
I see.
And so I have a package of theirs that will do things like noise reduction, but also do click removal, pop, hum. So, if you wanted to clean up vinyl or something, you could use it. But also we'll do click removal as in mouth noises.
Oh, I see.
All that yucky stuff. It can help reduce those. It will do things like deplosive. So if you're Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers and you're popping your peas, it's going to help with those.
I gotcha.
They also have a thing that's really amazing. That's a de-reverberator.
Oh.
So if you have a room that's way too echoey, then you can tame that with this software. So I use that to massage a lot of files, because one of the things that you quickly learn in the podcast world is that, especially if you have shows where they have different guests coming on who maybe don't podcast frequently,
right,
sound quality is going to vary widely.
Yeah, widely. A lot.
And that's the nice way of saying it.
Exactly. Which I've had a few of my other episodes where, various sound qualities. But I mean, that's part of podcasting, and having guest interviews and stuff. So it's just something you have to deal with. But cool. Well, that's a great recommendation, Izotope. Okay, so I'll have to put that in the show notes, and I'll put Adobe Audition in there, which I haven't tried. Thanks for showing it to me earlier today. I might think about that, because I know there's some libraries locally that give you free access to the Adobe suite, so I can go in there and use it and figure it out and see if it's makes sense for me or not.
Yeah.
So I think at the ThinkBox at Case Western Reserve University, that's a local research and high-end university here. They have a ThinkBox facility, which is filled with all kinds of techie tools and machining and 3D printing and computers, and they offer that as well.
Wow, that's
to the
really
community.
Cool.
So you can go in there just as a community member and say, hey, I just want to use the computer today, and they have the Adobe suite on there. So that's giving me more reasons to check it out, because I wanted to try to learn Photoshop and for other reasons in terms of just creating images and website stuff that goes with the show. But, so that's a great. And
there's a 30-day trial for the Creative Cloud stuff too.
Okay.
That you can get, and what's nice about that is it's not feature limited or save disabled or any of that stuff. Right. So you can really take it for a test drive and see what you think. But like, I know that you're using Audacity,
right? And
it's free.
Yeah,
I mean, it's amazing.
It's been great so far.
It's amazing what you can do with this free piece of software.
Right.
And something that I tell people all the time, as far as the tools and equipment of podcasting, is the barrier to entry is really pretty low.
It is low. It is.
The recording setup that you have here, it's awesome, because you have, like, in one backpack everything that we needed to be able to sit down at my dining room table.
Right.
In my house that needs badly remodeled. I'm glad this isn't a video show, because we wouldn't be doing it. Laptop, some free software, some microphones that were well under $100 each.
Yep.
Audio interface that wasn't more than $150.
Right.
And you're doing it at a pretty good quality level.
Right.
And that's the other thing too, I think, with podcasting, is the equipment. Everybody obsesses about the gear, right?
Yeah.
And you want to have a certain baseline of quality for your show. Otherwise, people are probably going to be more likely to tune out.
That's right. Yeah.
But ultimately, what matters most is what you're saying.
That's right. Yeah.
What the message is.
For sure. To me, content is everything. So I wanted to get it production-wise up to a certain level so that it's easily accessible and people aren't going to turn it off because of the sound quality. But the content reigns. I mean, if you're getting this, something that's really going to turn you on and move your business forward, or move your sort of mindset forward, and it's a little bit scratchy, it doesn't matter. This is so valuable, and it's going to be life-changing for you. You're going to listen. But the thing is, like you said, it's so low cost barrier to entry. I mean, that's what's fascinating about the times that we live in, and the times that you can now think about being a freelancer as your career,
right? Not
as like a side hustle, not as a second job, not as I'm a house husband, or I'm a wife and I take care of the kids and I have this other thing I do that's freelance thing, which is cool, and it's great to have those things too. Actually, to kind of have a distributed, multi-source income kind of thing, multi streams. But you can be a freelancer and connect, give people just super high quality work like you're doing, and people are, getting to know you, and you don't have to move to the right city, whatever the right city is.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Right, for you. You can grow up in your hometown, like in a rural area, or in a real, city area, and really dive into what you what your interests are.
Yeah.
So that's what's really cool about this stuff. So, we're getting to the near the end of the episode here, but I have a couple questions.
Gosh, already.
I know things are like kind of going quickly here, but before we get out of here, I want to ask you a couple of questions because I want to get your thoughts, especially through your experience of really being in the technical side of the world and in digital things. Is there anything out there that you find that you're really struggling with these days, like in terms of like that's overwhelming, that's like kind of like freaking you out a little bit in terms of the way you see the world?
Well, I'll tell you one thing is as far as what concerns me is not it's actually not the technology itself, but it's my human interface, meaning my fingers and my hands on the keyboard, on the mouse, on the trackpad. So many hours a day, every single day. And I have to be honest, that concerns me because I have dull to fairly annoying ache and stiffness in my fingers and my wrist pretty much all the time.
Oh, interesting.
And so
is this like a recent thing, or has it been going on for the last couple of years?
It's been going on for a while.
A while now.
Because I'm in front of the computer.
Because you're jamming it and
all the time.
Right.
And then when I'm not on the computer, what am I on? I'm on my phone.
Yeah.
Tap, 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 swipe, swipe, swipe.
Right.
And so the thing that concerns me about technology, or maybe it's the wish list of where I would love things to be able to go, is I would love more development in the world of efficient voice command. Now, notice efficient voice command.
Right.
And, I guess the future wish list thing for, 10, 15, 20 years from now would be eye command.
Right.
So I can just look at things
and move them around the screen.
Have them have, certain eye-based gestures or something. I don't know what it would be exactly, but I have this vision of being able to look at a screen and manipulate, just so that I have some more variety in that physical interaction. And I think, to something more directly addressing what your question was, what kind of scares me about technology. Well, I think there's a tendency to, if you're super tapped into the news online and social media online, I think it can be easy to get just emotionally overwhelmed by everything that goes on in the world, and just the sheer amount of information.
Yeah.
And that's kind of part of where, I don't know how this is for you, but I would guess that it's similar to where the saxophone is like my escape. I certainly incorporate elements of technology and things into how I practice the saxophone and whatnot. But in a lot of ways, it's a nice diversion from technology. It's kind of the way I unplug.
Right.
And you're plugging into this piece of metal and piece of wood. Right. Instead of the grid,
or whatever. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. So, like last episode 19 with Tom Moulier, we talked about his company iTrekkers and how he's helping people get away from technology. He's using technology to help people get away from technology by setting up these outdoor experiences, getting people back to nature. And I think as we go forward, we're really going to have to balance our time more overtly, I guess, pay attention to more consciously in a way. So, because when, people were growing up years ago, there was no technology. There was no worry about balancing it. There was no worry about sitting all day and doing inputs with your hands and your fingers and stuff, worrying about a carpal tunnel. We didn't worry about that years ago, but now we do, because it's a reality. So I think you have to be more conscious about disconnecting, finding some time to disconnect in that way for sure.
Right.
Going forward. So yeah, I'm with you on that tip. And playing music is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
And that's like a real meditation for me. Just practicing is just great, as well as playing and improvising, and kind of get you out of the daily things that are happening and just back into yourself. Cool. Well, interesting thoughts. So my second question for you is, as a freelancer, someone who's getting into it and is realizing like your clients are always asking you different questions or asking you to do different things, how do you take on the challenge? Maybe you can give people out there that are listening a tip or two of how to keep taking on the challenge of reinventing yourself, like being able to take on new projects that you may not have an expertise in.
Sure.
How do you reinvent yourself on a daily basis?
Yeah. I think for me, a lot of that just comes down to an openness and a willingness to learn, and being able to figure out what you don't know. Just to kind of tell a quick story about some direct experience I had with that. I alluded to earlier about working as a video producer for Delphi Automotive. And so I had some experience with video editing and a pretty decent amount of experience with still photography. I had worked as a stringer for newspapers back in the day as a side hustle.
Okay, and what's a stringer? I don't know
so
what
that's
that term is.
The newspaper word for freelancer.
Oh, okay.
So usually doing sports photography, high school sports.
Oh, I see. All right.
You go to the local craft show and take some nice pictures.
Okay.
That stuff. Not too much in the way of hard news. Although one thing I did get to do was cover a couple of campaign stops in the 2008 presidential election.
Oh,
when candidates were in the Columbus area. But
I see.
Anyways, I had this background in experience in still photography, but I had done almost nothing in the realm of shooting video.
I see.
I had edited some.
Yeah.
So through a series of divine intervention, fate, connections, I was able to get this job. And in a lot of ways, the first couple of months in the gig was I put myself through film school.
Oh, really? Wow.
Basically.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by put myself through film school? I Googled the hell out of everything I didn't know.
Right.
Or figured out what I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then tried to learn as much as I could.
So it was like crash course, like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the company didn't have any equipment. It was starting this initiative from scratch.
I see.
Which was great because, it didn't mean that I was walking into this already established thing and it was like, okay, here's all your stuff. Your first shoot is tomorrow. Actually had, which would not have been a good situation.
Right.
So I had the opportunity to learn and to build it and grow it in the way that I thought would be best for what it was that we needed to accomplish.
I see.
And I think that flexibility and the openness to learning and figuring stuff out was invaluable in that situation.
Right.
And that contract came to an early end, so I found myself not with the security of the 40-hour-a-week day job once again.
Right.
And so the way things were different for me this time around, as opposed to when I had gotten laid off from the previous job, was I embraced what the change was.
Right.
It's like, okay, well that's done, and that's that's okay.
That's what it was.
It's
right?
what it was,
Yep.
and this is where we are now. And so I'm just about another couple of weeks here at the 1-year anniversary of full-time freelance.
I see. Okay.
I've been freelance for a long time,
right.
to one degree or another.
Mm-hmm.
But, even going back to the Tri-C thing, the adjunct instructor thing, yes, that's freelance essentially. Mm-hmm. But there's a certain safety net there, I guess, because it's kind of, there's no guarantee that you're going to get rehired from one semester to another.
Right.
But it serves as I guess you could think of it as a pretty decent like anchor client,
right,
to have in your life.
Right.
And so I'm just about 1 year into no safety net, and it's terrifying, but it's great.
Yeah. Well, I think you'll just continue to see more opportunities because, like you said, you are open. You're open to learning or open to taking on new challenges. And these days, with the way technology moves so fast, when someone's asking you to do something that's new, if you learn that new technology, I mean, you're all of a sudden at the forefront. Right. You're all of a sudden the expert, and maybe the national or world expert in it because it's just the newest thing, Yeah. And so that's to me, that's just how we have to continue to change and think about the world because there's some real structural things that are just really moving things around quickly these days.
Yeah.
It's the way I feel, and it's the connectedness I think is one of the big driving forces. So cool, man. Well, Jim, it's been great having you on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasher. Thanks for coming to the armpit of Ohio and hanging out.
Jim works for the Commerce Department of Warren, City of Warren, by the way. No, just kidding. No, we love Warren, Ohio.
Yes.
But the before we get out of here, do you want to hand out your handles, or how would people get in touch with you if they're interested in connecting, or just talking podcasting, or editing, or freelancing? Because you can do all these things: sound design, front of house engineering. We didn't even talk about all that kind of stuff. But
so anything that you want to talk about with me, I'm totally into it. I'm J Metzendorf on Twitter, letter J, and then my last name Metzendorf. I also have a website where I sell an ebook about podcast production, and that ebook is in the process of being revised. So there's going to be a new version soon, but you can go to audiopodcastguide.com and get in touch with me through there.
Okay, perfect. And I'll have those in the show notes, so I'll look for those for that information there.
All right.
So thanks again, Jim.
Thanks, man.
All right, see ya. Thank you for listening to Jim's Reinvention Revolution podcast. If you want to hear more, join our mailing list at jimreinventionrevolution.com. See you next time, and remember, the revolution has just begun. So dig in, embrace the process of reinvention, and start realizing the success you've always dreamed of.